Imagine being captured in war, expecting cruelty and punishment, but instead your enemy hands you a uniform, lets you work on family farms, and invites you to eat at their dinner table. These German prisoners couldn't process what was happening because everything they'd been told about Americans was completely wrong. What happened next would challenge everything they believed about enemies, and some would face an impossible choice that would haunt them forever. The arrival. The year is 1943. German soldiers step off trains in rural America. They're prisoners of war now. These men expect punishment. They expect hard labor camps. Back home, Nazi propaganda told them Americans were cruel. They were told Americans would treat them like animals. Some POWs were genuinely afraid they'd be executed. But when they arrived at small farming towns, something completely unexpected happened. American officers handed them clean uniforms, not prison rags, actual uniforms. Then they were driven to family farms, not labor camps, but actual homes with families. The German prisoners looked around in confusion. Where were the guards with guns? Where were the barbed wire fences? Where was the cruelty they'd been promised? One POW later wrote in his diary, "I thought this was a trick. I waited for the trap. But the trap never came. Instead, something far stranger was waiting." The work begins. The German POWs were given an assignment: work on American farms, not as slaves, as workers. Here's what shocked them most. They got paid, actual money, 80 cents per day. That doesn't sound like much now, but back then it mattered. They also got 3 full meals every single day. Remember, Germany was starving at this time. Their own families back home were eating potato peels and bread made from sawdust. But here in America, these prisoners were eating meat, fresh vegetables, and real bread. One POW from Bavaria couldn't believe it. He wrote home, "I eat better here than I did before the war." But there was a catch. American farmers were desperate. Most young American men had gone overseas to fight. The farms needed workers, or crops would rot in the fields. So the U.S. government made a controversial decision that would change everything. The trust experiment. What controversial decision? Why was trust so shocking? The U.S. government decided to trust enemy soldiers. Let that sink in for a moment. These were the same men who'd been shooting at Americans weeks earlier. Now they were working beside American families. In many cases, the guards stayed back at the camps. The POWs would ride out to farms with just one farmer. No guns pointed at them, no chains. This was unthinkable to the Germans. In Nazi Germany, prisoners were worked to death. In Soviet camps, millions were dying. But in America, enemy soldiers were being treated like regular workers. Some POWs tested this trust. They thought about escaping. But then they asked themselves, escape to where? They were in the middle of Kansas or Iowa, flat land for miles. Plus they were eating well and being treated fairly. Why run? One prisoner later admitted, "I had more freedom as an American POW than I had as a German soldier." But this freedom came with a hidden danger. The forbidden bonds. What hidden danger? What bonds formed? The U.S. military had strict rules. Fraternization was forbidden. That means prisoners and Americans weren't supposed to become friends. But in small farming communities, rules from Washington didn't matter much. These families needed help. The Germans needed human connection. And slowly, quietly, something natural happened. Friendships formed. Farmers started inviting POWs to eat dinner at their tables, not outside, like animals, inside, with the family. Mothers packed extra food for them. Kids practiced their German phrases. One POW named Hans worked on a Nebraska farm. The farmer's wife noticed Hans looked sad around Christmas, so she baked him traditional German cookies, the same ones his mother used to make. Hans cried. For the first time, he saw Americans as real people, not enemies, just people. But these friendships were creating a problem nobody expected. The identity crisis. What problem? Why a crisis? The German POWs started having mental breakdowns, not from cruelty, from kindness. Think about this from their perspective. For years, Nazi propaganda told them Americans were evil, the enemy, subhuman even. Everything in their training said Americans were ruthless. But now they were eating at American tables, laughing with American kids, being treated better than they'd ever been treated by their own officers. Their entire worldview was collapsing. Some POWs became deeply depressed. They couldn't process the contradiction. Others became angry at their own government for lying to them. One prisoner wrote, "I don't know who I am anymore. Who is the enemy? What was I fighting for?" Meanwhile, back in Germany, their families were suffering. Cities were being bombed, people were starving, and here they were, gaining weight in American farmland. The guilt was crushing. Then came the day that changed everything for one young prisoner. The forbidden love. What day? What happened to this prisoner? His name was Friedrich. He was 22 years old. He worked on a farm in Kansas. The farmer had a daughter named Mary. This was the ultimate forbidden relationship, technically illegal, socially unacceptable. Her brother was fighting Germans in France, while a German prisoner worked their land. But Friedrich and Mary didn't care about politics. They started with small glances, then short conversations during water breaks, then longer walks after work when nobody was watching. They both knew it was dangerous. If military police found out, Friedrich could be transferred immediately. Mary's family could face serious consequences. The whole town would turn against them. So they kept it secret. They wrote letters to each other and hid them in the barn. They met in fields far from the house. For 18 months, they loved each other in silence. Then in 1945, the war ended. And Friedrich faced an impossible choice. The painful return. What choice? What happened when they went home? When Germany surrendered, the POWs had to go back. No exceptions. Friedrich begged American officers to let him stay. He offered to work for free. He didn't care. They said no. In 1946, Friedrich boarded a ship back to Germany. Mary stood on the dock and watched him disappear. They didn't know if they'd ever see each other again. What Friedrich found in Germany was devastating. His hometown was rubble. His family home was destroyed. His father was dead. His mother and sister were living in a refugee camp. The America he'd left behind felt like a dream. Thousands of German POWs experienced this same shock. They'd spent years in American comfort. Now they were back in a destroyed country with no food, no jobs, no future. Many fell into deep depression. But some of them couldn't let go of what they'd found in America. The secret reunions. Did any come back? What happened to Friedrich and Mary? 20 years passed. Then something remarkable started happening. Former German POWs began returning to America. Not as prisoners this time, as visitors, as tourists. They tracked down the farms where they'd worked. They looked for the families they'd never forgotten. Some found the farmers were still alive, elderly now, but they remembered. These reunions were emotional. Grown men hugging each other and crying in fields. Old women seeing the boys they'd fed decades ago. And Friedrich, he saved money for 12 years. In 1958, he bought a plane ticket to Kansas. He knocked on Mary's door. She opened it.
They stared at each other for a long moment. Then she fell into his arms. They got married 3 months later. Today, their grandchildren live in both Germany and America. A family created because two enemies refused to hate each other. That's the story nobody teaches you about war. This is the untold story of German POWs working on American farms during World War II. While history focuses on battles, German POWs provided crucial farm labor that kept America fed. These Axis POWs received wages, interacted with American farmers as equals, and contributed to U.S. agriculture when it needed them most. Their stories reveal something deeper than labor camps. They show humanity surviving war. German POWs' farm work created bonds that lasted lifetimes. If you found this fascinating, share it with someone who loves forgotten history. Because sometimes the most powerful war stories happen far from the battlefield.